Today, Jennifer Lawless with American University is Skyping in from New York, an undisclosed location in New York, but not Trump Tower. Jennifer, how are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
We are great here. Did you catch the eclipse yesterday?
I didn't see it. I was looking and I didn't even see it. I think it was a little cloudy. I saw all of these beautiful photos on Facebook, and to me, it was just like a regular Monday afternoon. So I'm eagerly awaiting the next one.
2024 will be around the corner before we know it. You're probably too tethered to politics and what's going on inside the Beltway. Let's start off with Trump's address on the country's policy in Afghanistan. Talk with us about the timing of this.
Well, the cynical view of the timing is that it was a way to change the narrative and pivot away from the Charlottesville reaction and move on to something that was more sort of secure footing. The irony of that, of course, is that the substance of the speech is completely antithetical to everything that Donald Trump promised on the campaign trail. That's not to say that what he said is particularly controversial. He's saying that this is what his generals are advising. It's not that different from what we've seen over the course of the last 8 years in terms of what Barack Obama felt he had to do in Afghanistan, but it certainly demonstrates a policy disconnect. So I think that probably they figured it was a good idea. It would be a policy-heavy speech, and it would be read from a teleprompter, so nothing could go wrong. I mean, so if that's the standard, it was a success.
So let's talk a little bit about the points that were raised by the president during this address. As you mentioned, on the campaign trail, he, as a civilian, took an approach saying, you know, we should not be in Afghanistan, we should not be sending more troops over there. Is this really a result, obviously, of sort of the military role within his administration that he, didn't necessarily have on the campaign trail?
I mean, I think that's part of it. I also think that what we've seen is over the course of the last 6 or 7 months, it's become clear that what Donald Trump said on the campaign trail was not often grounded in reality. And as president, he's now surrounded by people who understand what's going on in a lot of different policy arenas, Afghanistan being one of them. The one thing that I would note, though, is that it was still an explicitly political speech. He made it seem like this was a problem that Barack Obama created and that Donald Trump inherited this terrible hand and was going to be the one to fix it, when the reality is that the policy isn't really going to change that much at all.
And again, here we are in 2017. Again, is there any expectation, if you will, inside the Beltway that anything is going to get fixed in Afghanistan? It's a quagmire, if you will. He talked about, again, sending over additional troops. Wouldn't put a number on it. Does anyone have any faith that sort of the Afghanistan problem will be solved anytime soon?
I don't think so. I mean, I think part of the goal at this point is to keep it from getting worse and to try and isolate small targets or enclaves that are particularly violent or threatening. But Afghanistan in 2001 is not Afghanistan in 2008, and that's not Afghanistan in 2017. So the same way that our politics have evolved and the war has taken on different meaning, ISIS has emerged, there are new challenges to face. And so, I think from that perspective, what the president said last night wasn't particularly controversial. It's just that a lot of his supporters who believed that we were going to be out of there immediately might be disappointed.
So we saw that, as you just mentioned again, in the wake of Charlottesville, and especially the aftermath of Charlottesville. Here we are on Tuesday. Is there any sort of Charlottesville hangover, especially politically, for the president? Will it continue to haunt him moving forward?
I think so, and I think so for two reasons. The first is the broad point that what he said is something that is still absolutely stunning to a lot of people. And so this is not something that is easily going to be replaced. The other reason that I think it has legs is because tonight he's going to Arizona and he's going off script. He is not giving a speech where he's going to be reading from a teleprompter. He's going to be speaking in Arizona, in large part probably about immigration, perhaps about Sheriff Arpaio, who rumor has it he's thinking of pardoning. And it's these kinds of speeches where he actually gets himself into trouble. So the fact that he's going to Arizona tonight has made Charlottesville another major news story today, because people are talking about the extent to which the remarks that we saw and didn't expect last Tuesday could potentially be replicated in the venue this evening.
And so, I often end our conversations with what next. Apparently, all eyes on Arizona tonight to see what the president says. Let's talk a little bit about the exit of Steve Bannon. Not entirely a surprise. Again, a sort of the Friday afternoon news dump, if you will. Bannon criticized the president for his remarks on Afghanistan. Will Bannon continue to be now a thorn, do you think, in the president's side?
I mean, if we believe the pundits and the people that are speaking anonymously from inside the White House, he's going to be a thorn in the president's side in that Jared and Ivanka are going to be two of his main targets. And so, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see a ton of explicit criticism of Donald Trump himself or of the Trump agenda. But I do think that any kind of establishment policies that the administration embraces, any kind of statement that Jared Kushner or Ivanka Trump make that might seem antithetical to what the president and Steve Bannon were initially pushing will be fodder for, not only commentary on Breitbart, but commentary by Steve Bannon to a lot of other news outlets as well. He says that he's going to continue to fight the president's war, but he's also made it pretty clear that his view of that war is what Donald Trump said he wanted to do on the campaign trail, and not necessarily what he is able to do and what is feasible as president.
I'm sure you saw the memes that made their way around, especially Friday afternoon, with sort of the Trump advisors and circles over their faces and X's over them, calling it sort of Trump survivor, who's going to be voted off next. Clearly a lot of attention's being paid to Jared Kushner and Ivanka. Obviously, they are family. It's a different dynamic than these other advisors who have loose ties to the president. Do you think that they are able to, will they basically stay through thick and thin?
I think that they'll stay through, if not in a formal capacity, then certainly informally. It's tricky because obviously firing them is not the same as firing Reince Priebus or Sean Spicer or Steve Bannon, because they are family. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that it was just yesterday that we found out that the Secret Service can't handle the size of Trump's family and can't provide the kind of protection that's needed. And I think that's one more way that these family ties are becoming an issue in the White House. So I wouldn't be surprised if over the course of the next few months we see sort of maybe, a winnowing of the power and the responsibilities that had been given both to Kushner and Ivanka Trump.
Speaking of family relations and people making their way into the news, we did see today Secretary of the Treasury Mnuchin's wife's comments on, was it Instagram?
Yeah.
Is this one of those 24-hour news cycle stories? For folks who don't know, Mnuchin's wife had a picture, and they were ostensibly walking out of a government-issued plane. Tennessee, was it? Saying happy to be Kentucky.
Yeah.
Was happy to be there. Hashtag Hermes, a few sort of luxury brands. And then she responded to someone who had, said, well, is this on taxpayer dollars? And kind of went on a rant and then closed down her Instagram account. Is this just one of those 24-hour news stories?
It's probably just a 24-hour news story, unless the Democrats decide that this is a narrative that they actually want to play heading into 2018. Now, it's a little bit tricky because under ordinary circumstances, being a billionaire and being incredibly wealthy is a good way to be it's a good way for opponents to suggest that you're out of touch with what's actually going on in the country. We saw this when Ann Romney wore a $900 shirt on the Today Show when Mitt Romney was running for president. She was basically raked over the coals for that and seeing that they were out of touch. When Mitt Romney said that Ann had a couple of Cadillacs, that was seen as her voting. That said, Melania Trump wears $1 million outfits. Nobody says anything. Donald Trump says that he's the richest man in the world, even if he's not, and that gets applause, and he's a blue-collar billionaire. So I think there are some limits to sort of painting this administration as out of touch. It just doesn't seem to resonate. However, what was different about this was that this was not a situation where she was talking about working really hard and then having money to spend $30,000 on the outfit that she was wearing, and that's actually what it's estimated to have cost. This was a situation where she said, don't talk to me about taxpayer money, we pay more in taxes than you do. And if this is the kind of way that the Republicans, and the Secretary of the Treasury in particular, is going to be talking when we know that tax reform is the next big item on the agenda, then the Democrats could potentially make something out of that and demonstrate that it's not necessarily being out of touch, it's just sort of highlighting how the tax relief that they're hoping to offer is probably going to be unfair.
We'll see if any sort of rhetoric or memes or anything comes of it, but again, as we mentioned it did sort of capture national attention just by her reaction, as you said, lashing out, saying, we pay more taxes than you, kind of backtracked a little bit, and then she just shut the whole Instagram account down, which is too bad. I would have liked to have followed her on Instagram. She seems rather amusing. Anything else as we stand here on this Tuesday afternoon? You're in New York. We're up here in Rhode Island. Summer's waning and fall's approaching. I know we've continuously talked about prospects for tax reform and any policy sort of achievements in DC, but again, this post-Charlottesville era, what are we looking at, Jennifer?
Well, last night, Paul Ryan had his town hall in Wisconsin, and CNN broadcast it live, and there were a lot of questions about healthcare and tax reform and infrastructure and why it is that the Republicans aren't able to get anything done. And the two things that struck me first were that there's clearly a lot of infighting in Washington. So Paul Ryan had no problem throwing Mitch McConnell and the Senate under the bus, blaming it on Senate rules when he could, but also making it clear that House members should feel no allegiance to their Republican counterparts in the Senate because they need to go out on the campaign trail and highlight that they've passed 300 bills. It's just that the Senate hasn't been able to get on board and do the same thing. And that's tricky because for most voters, distinguishing between the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate is just not at the top of their list of important things to do on a Tuesday. The other thing I would note that he mentioned was that he thinks tax reform is going to be a lot easier than health care because health care was succumbed to a series of Senate rules that made it difficult for the House and the Senate to be on the same page starting at the beginning. What I would note that Paul Ryan did not note is that tax reform in general is hindered by health care because it was supposed to be the money freed up by overturning Obamacare that was going to fund a lot of this tax relief. And so maybe the Senate rules won't become as much money for this. So my sense is that late August and early September are going to be a lot more.
And talk with us a little bit about the sort of inter-party chamber fighting. Have we seen this in recent years in DC at all?
Not to the extent that it could affect majority control of the House of Representatives. Right? Paul Ryan is very worried because the House of Representatives is held to the same standard that the Trump administration or the U.S. Senate are. Then he's going to lose, and Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats are going to come back to power. Even though the House has actually been very, very successful doing the things that Republican members of the House promised that they were going to do. Now, in typical years, we don't see this problem because when there is unified party control, usually the majority party gets stuff done. And when there's not unified party control, then you don't have to blame your co-partisans in the other chamber. You can blame the other party. So this is, I think, an example of Paul Ryan feeling like he got his ducks in a row and he was able to do what John Boehner, his predecessor, had been unable to do, and it didn't matter because he still doesn't have any legislative accomplishments to show for it.
Never a dull moment down there. You're in New York. When does school start?
Monday.
Getting in the last of
my summer vacation.
The end of your summer vacation, and you're still working, still doing media. We always appreciate it, Jennifer. Next week when we talk, you'll be back at school, and I'm sure there'll be plenty to talk about. You never know what a week's going to hold in this political climate. So Jennifer Lawless, thank you as always for Skyping in.
My pleasure.
Okay.
Bye-bye.